Good evening, and thank you for joining the public meeting tonight on the General Management Plan for Valles Caldera National Preserve. If you're joining through the phone, please make sure your phone is on mute throughout the presentation. And now we'll hear from Jorge Silva Banuelos, Superintendent of Valles Caldera National Preserve.
Thank you, Ryan. Good evening. My name is Jorge Silva Banuelos. I'm the superintendent here at Valles Caldera National Preserve. Thank you so much for joining us for this virtual presentation to learn more about the preliminary concepts that the National Park Service has developed as part of Valles Caldera's general management planning process. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce Sarah Bodo, project manager with the NPS, who will walk us through some of the logistics for tonight's presentation. Next slide.
Thank you, Jorge. I'm delighted to be speaking with you tonight. After the presentation, we will hold a question and answer session. The presentation should take about 45 minutes, and that should leave us with plenty of time to hear your questions about the plan. And we'll close the meeting tonight at 6:30 p.m. We will be recording the presentation so that people who missed tonight's meeting have the opportunity to watch it. We anticipate the recording will be posted to the project website sometime next week, and it will be announced by email and social media. So to review some logistics, Teams Live is the virtual platform we are using to host tonight's meeting. We have also provided a dial-in number for those that prefer to join by phone. We wanted to make sure that people could join even if they don't have a computer or a reliable internet connection. I also wanted to add that Birnbaum Interpreting Service is providing real-time captioning. If you would like to use this live captioning service, please click on the link that we will include in the Q&A panel now. And you can get to that panel by clicking on the dialogue icon in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Next slide. This slide shows how you can adjust the sound volume, which is the megaphone icon, also located at the lower left-hand corner of the Teams screen. We'll go to the next slide. After the presentation, we'll invite you to type questions to us in the question and answer panel. And to get there, this is at the upper right-hand side of the screen, where there are two dialogue bubbles. That allows you to turn the Q&A function on or off. And we'll provide more instructions about this when we get to the question and answer session. Please note that we won't be responding to questions until the end of the presentation. We do have a lot of information to share tonight, and hopefully we'll answer some of your questions along the way. But once we wrap up, we're more than happy to address any additional questions you may have or provide more clarification on anything we mentioned. Now back to Jorge.
Thank you, Sarah. The purpose of the meeting tonight is to introduce the general management plan and explain the overall planning process. We will then describe the preliminary concepts that have been developed so far. After that, there will be an opportunity to ask clarifying questions about the preliminary concepts, and we will also share some information about how you can learn more and provide feedback during the public comment period, which is open through June 9th of this year. Next slide. Before I introduce the plan, I would like to acknowledge that Valles Caldera is of spiritual and ceremonial importance to numerous American Indian peoples in the greater Southwest region. We recognize this as a regionally significant geographic and cultural focal point and a pivotal sacred place for numerous tribal groups. These cultural connections are both contemporary and of great antiquity, and we respectfully seek to uphold the values and prioritize the voices of the tribes and pueblos for whom this special place continues to be part of their practices, beliefs, identity, and history. Next slide. We will now introduce the plan and planning process. Next slide. The planning area consists of the entire 88,900 acre congressionally legislated boundary of Valles Caldera National Preserve, as you can see here. To orient you to the park and current operations, To the southeast corner, Valles Caldera shares a boundary with the upper watershed of Bandelier National Monument. To the northeast, the park shares a boundary with the Pueblo of Santa Clara. Elsewhere, the park is adjacent to the Santa Fe National Forest. New Mexico State Route 4 is the red line that traverses the southern portion of the park and serves as the only paved road currently within the park. Near the western boundary, there's an area known as Sulphur Springs that contains some of the most valuable geothermal surface expressions within the park, such as hot springs, mud pots, and fumaroles, many of which are unique to New Mexico and rare in the entire United States. Branching north from State Route 4, the main entrance road, which serves as the only public entry point into the interior of the park, travels through the Valle Grande, leading visitors to the park's entrance station in the middle of that immense grassland valley. Due to limited infrastructure, the entrance station has served as the only access control point in the park, and therefore creates an informal delineation between the park's front country and back country. Up until this year, to venture beyond the entrance station, visitors were issued a limited number of backcountry vehicle permits from that location. While not a topic of this presentation, the park is actively working on steps to expand vehicle access into the north side of the Valle Grande and the Baca Ranch Cabin District without the need for a backcountry vehicle permit. Beyond the Cabin District, where a rudimentary visitor contact station is located, a backcountry vehicle route provides visitors with vehicle access into the central and northern portions of the park for hiking, fishing, hunting, and other recreational activities. The existing trail network, showed in dotted lines on this map, consists almost entirely of legacy logging roads, some of which are also used as administrative vehicle routes. At an elevation between 8,000 to 11,000 feet, most of the park outside the Valle Grande is inaccessible by vehicle in winter due to snow. Next slide. A General Management Plan, or GMP, is a broad document that defines long-term management goals over a 20 to 30-year horizon. It focuses on establishing a management vision that balances conservation of park resources with opportunities to establish meaningful connections with the park's resources and legacy. General management planning defines the desired natural and cultural resources conditions to be achieved and maintained over time, identifies the necessary conditions for visitors to enjoy and connect to the park's resources, and outlines the kinds and levels of management activities, visitor use, and development that will achieve desired conditions. In addition, Valles Caldera's GMP will consider alternative development concepts for enhanced visitor services and support infrastructure in the Valle Grande district. Next slide. As a starting point for the GMP, the National Park Service looks to congressional intent found in the enabling legislation for the Park Unit, as well as the Organic Act, which established the National Park Service, both of which are summarized in the Park Purpose and NPS mission statement found here. Located in the Jemez Mountains of north central New Mexico, Valles Caldera National Preserve protects, preserves, and restores ecosystems and cultural landscapes within an outstanding example of a volcanic caldera for the purpose of education, scientific research, public enjoyment and use, and cultural continuity. The National Park Service preserves unimpaired the natural and cultural resources and values of the national park system for the enjoyment, education, and inspiration of this and future generations. The Park Service cooperates with partners to extend the benefits of natural and cultural resource conservation and outdoor recreation throughout this country and the world. Next slide. A GMP is needed for multiple reasons. First, it is called for in the park's enabling legislation. Furthermore, it is needed to improve visitor experiences while preserving Valles Caldera's landscapes, resources, cultural connections, and habitats. To address visitor access to and within the park, as legacy roads were not engineered or designed for public use. and to provide fundamental visitor services, including potable water, restrooms, parking, and trails that are accessible to all visitors, including people with disabilities. The NPS also needs to plan for the management of visitors at their current levels and proactively prepare for anticipated growth in annual visitation to the park. Next slide. When the NPS assumed management of Valles Caldera, it inherited very limited infrastructure. And of the legacy infrastructure that did exist, almost all of it was not constructed or designed for public use. This includes legacy ranch and logging roads, which are currently used as public roads, administrative roads, and public trails. As you can see from the image on the left, public roads within the park are all dirt roads that are difficult to maintain and create access challenges, especially in the winter, as dirt roads cannot be plowed in the same way as paved roads. The image on the right is of a surface water catchment system that was destroyed after the 2013 Thompson Ridge fire. The NPS has repaired it sufficiently to provide drinking water for limited administrative use, but it is not suitable for a public water system. Next slide. The images on this slide show the only two visitor contact facilities within the park. On the left is the park entrance station, and on the right is the ranger station in the park's cabin district. Both buildings were inherited by the NPS, and neither is currently accessible. The park also lacks designated parking and permanent restroom facilities other than at the entrance station area. Elsewhere in the park, visitors park along pullouts and previously disturbed areas alongside the road and use portable toilets that the NPS has deployed along interior public roads. The other issues that the plan will address are not as easily shown in photos, but they include the limited visitor experiences, such as formalized trail system and on-site interpretive displays and exhibits. Next slide. Since 2015, the NPS has undertaken a significant planning workload, and many of these plans will help to inform the GMP planning process. This includes a foundation document, cultural landscape inventory, historic resources study, historic structures report, wildlife management framework, natural resources condition assessment, and facilities investment plan. In addition, we are currently working on a front country infrastructure improvement plan and fire management plan. In 2021, the park conducted civic engagement and tribal consultation regarding draft management zoning concepts, which are being carried forward into the GMP. Last year, we initiated the GMP and Front Country Development Concept Plan, along with two parallel assessments to evaluate wilderness and wild and scenic river eligibility within the park. After developing preliminary management concepts and ideas, we are now at the stage of seeking feedback from the park's associated tribes and the public on these concepts and ideas. Later this year and into 2024, we will work on developing the draft plan and associated environmental and historic preservation compliance documents with the next round of civic engagement planned for winter 2024. And by summer 2025, we hope to have a final plan and decision document completed. Next slide. With all that as context, we will now go into further details about the preliminary concepts that have been developed so far. Next slide. Management zoning in the NPS is somewhat similar to zoning efforts conducted by a city or town, where different areas of a municipality are zoned for residential use, commercial use, and industrial use, for example. In the case of Valles Caldera, management zoning is needed to determine general types or intensities of development appropriate in geographically distinct areas of the park, to preserve and protect fundamental resources and values, enhance visitor access, experience, and opportunities in a sustainable way, and to support and uphold the purpose for which the park was established. As you can see on this map, we have developed 3 zoning concepts and associated desired conditions within the park. A visitor engagement zone shown in blue, a self-guided zone shown in orange, and a backcountry self-reliance zone shown in light green. The visitor engagement zone is located primarily in the Valle Grande district, along with New Mexico State Route 4 road corridor, where it traverses the park, and two other nodes that extend into Redondo Meadow and Sulphur Springs on the western side of the park. This zone is where most short-term visitors to the park will go. These easy-to-reach areas may have higher visitor use and visitor density. Visitors are provided with opportunities to experience, appreciate, and connect with park resources in a more developed setting. Most of the development, visitor services, and facilities in the park are in this zone, and most public roads would be open year-round. Visitors are offered a variety of opportunities for all ability levels, including on-site interpretation and education to learn about park resources. The self-guided zone is where visitors can venture away from the main hub of park activity and directly experience the sights and sounds of the natural landscape. The zone includes development and facilities that are dispersed and designed for low to moderate densities of visitors. This zone includes transportation corridors and trails to explore the park, and most facilities would occur within these corridors. Public roads in this zone would be open seasonally. Although a degree of self-reliance and outdoor skill is necessary, areas in this zone are not so remote that they require a high level of skill or preparation. Lastly, the backcountry self-reliance zone encompasses large contiguous areas of the park where natural processes, ecosystem function, and wildlife behavior are prioritized, and visitors can experience solitude in diverse natural landscapes with few encounters with other visitors. Areas in this zone are remote and undeveloped, requiring a higher degree of outdoor skill and self-reliance. Beyond primitive trails and minimal signage, this zone has no maintained visitor facilities. Next slide. This map depicts preliminary concepts for public roads, trails, trailheads, and front country camping locations. With regard to roads, under this concept, the park would establish 3 more vehicle entry points in addition to the existing vehicle entry point in Valle Grande. The other 3 entry points would be located on the west side of the park at Banco Bonito, directly adjacent to State Route 4, Redondo Meadow, about 1.5 miles into the park, and Sulphur Springs, about 0.5 miles into the park. The entry points would lead to day-use parking areas and trailheads. Within Valle Grande, the public road open to vehicles without a permit would expand from 2 miles to 9 miles. And we'll get into more details about the Valle Grande district in a later slide. A backcountry gate would be established north of Cerro Piñon, as depicted on this map, which would become the new delineation of the front country and backcountry. From that point on, the backcountry vehicle route which would remain an unpaved gravel road, would be extended down Sulphur Canyon towards Sulphur Springs, adding about 5 miles to the existing backcountry vehicle route for a total of 20 miles. Under this concept, the NPS would establish 21 trailheads with parking throughout the park unit. Total miles of trails throughout the park would be around 130 miles. Most of the trails would be existing trails that the NPS would formalize, improve, and then maintain. The map depicts 3 new trails that the park would establish. In the Valle Grande district, a trail would be established that connects from State Route 4 to an official trail leading down the canyon along the East Fork Jemez River, continuing to the Cabin district, connecting to the Valle Jaramillo, along a path along the eastern slope of Redondo foothills, and continuing between Cerro Abrigo and Cerro Santa Rosa. The idea behind this trail is to create a non-motorized path that a visitor could take to get from the south side of the park all the way to the north side. The second new trail would be a short trail that leads up to the summit of Cerro La Jara that's located within Valle Grande. And the third trail would be a reroute of the trail coming from Valle de los Pozos on the east side of the park, following the edge of Cerro del Medio into Obsidian Valley and along the edge of Cerro Abrigo. With regard to camping, the preliminary concept includes a developed campground at Banco Bonito in a previously disturbed area that was used as a log decking area during the private timber harvesting days, and where the predecessor management agency established a primitive campground for permittee use. And within the Valle Grande district, under this concept, there would be 3 primitive walk-up campsites, one on Rabbit Mountain along Forest Road 289, another near South Mountain, and a third near Cerro Piñon. At these locations, cars would park in a parking area alongside the road and walk up to tent sites from there. We're also interested in establishing a backcountry camping and backpacking program. While we have yet to develop any preliminary concepts around this idea, it is something we hope to include in this planning effort after further evaluation. Next slide. This map depicts preliminary concepts for trail use within Valles Caldera. Trails depicted as purple dashed lines, which are all within the Valle Grande district, would be open to hiking only. This accounts for about 13 miles of trails. Trails depicted as orange dotted lines would be open to hiking and horseback riding, totaling about 41 miles. And trails depicted as solid blue lines would be open to hiking, horseback riding, and mountain biking, totaling another 76 miles. I'll note that this map does not depict where e-bikes might be allowed in the future. This is an area that requires further evaluation and follow-up. Next slide. This map depicts preliminary development concepts for the Valle Grande district. At this scale, it is easier to see the trail, the new trail concepts that would create a trail from State Route 4 to the East Fork Jemez River Canyon area and continuing north into the backcountry. This development concept also includes an accessible boardwalk trail along State Route 4 with various pullouts and overlooks that would provide a safer location for scenic and wildlife viewing off of the main road. With regard to public roads within the park, the preliminary concept expands where visitors can drive within the Valle Grande district without a permit. Besides the main entrance road, visitors would be able to drive along the north side of Valle Grande from the Cabin District south to a trailhead parking area near South Mountain, as well as north to a trailhead parking area near Cerro Piñon. This would provide visitors with more access to backcountry trail networks, even without a backcountry vehicle pass, as well as enhanced access to all the fundamental resources and values within the Front Country Valle Grande district. Roads and parking within the Valle Grande district, as it is within the visitor engagement zone, would be paved. This will help reduce dust, erosion, and sedimentation runoff into wetlands and streams, reduce sound from vehicles, and greatly improve winter access by making it easier to plow the roads when they're snow covered. It will also improve accessibility for people with disabilities. This map also highlights a few different scenarios for the main entrance road, the road through the Cabin District on the north side of the Valle Grande, and a location for the park's primary visitor services area. With regard to the main entrance road, the NPS is evaluating 2 scenarios. First, establishing a 2-lane paved road along the existing entrance road alignment, and second, to realign the main entrance road further west towards South Mountain. Under the first scenario, the paved road would be constructed along the existing road alignment, where there are existing road disturbances through the Valle Grande. While wetlands and other natural and cultural resources have already been impacted here, new disturbances would occur where the road is widened and elevated to ensure the river does not flood over the road. And the bridge across the East Fork Jemez River would also have to be expanded. The prairie dog colony near the present-day entrance station would also likely have to be removed and relocated. The second scenario would be to realign the road to the west towards South Mountain. This would entail new disturbances to natural and cultural resources, and a new bridge would be needed at the East Fork crossing, similar to the first scenario. Both alignments go through wetlands, and the roads would need to be engineered in a manner that reduces those impacts. By moving the road to the west, however, it would move it further out of the Valle Grande viewshed, and vehicles would enter the north side of the Valle Grande to the west of the Cabin District rather than directly in the center of the district. This would improve long-term preservation of the historic and cultural setting of this area. Along this realignment, an accessible fishing area would be established and would provide interpretive opportunities along the road that are different and distinct from the middle of the Valle Grande. Lastly, under this scenario, the NPS may consider keeping the existing road alignment as a gravel non-motorized path that would be suitable for hiking, biking, horseback riding, and cross-country skiing with groomed trails and snowshoeing in the winter. With regard to the road from the Cabin District through History Grove, one of the park's last remaining old-growth forests, the first scenario is to continue using it as the primary vehicle route for vehicle traffic to Cerro Piñon trailhead and beyond to the backcountry. The second scenario is to create a bypass road behind the Cabin District and History Grove that would reconnect to the existing road somewhere past History Grove. There are pros and cons to both scenarios. Under scenario 1, it would minimize new disturbances by following an existing road corridor. However, vehicle traffic would create permanent impacts to the historic setting of the Cabin District, and it would be difficult, if not impossible, to avoid cutting down trees in History Grove to create a 2-lane road to meet road safety requirements. It would also create permanent sound impacts in both areas. Under scenario 2, there would be new disturbances where a road does not currently exist. However, it would eliminate vehicles from both the Cabin District and History Grove, thereby preserving the historic and natural setting of both areas. The current road would then be converted to a non-motorized trail for pedestrians, horseback riding, and mountain biking, as well as cross-country skiing and snowshoeing in the winter. Finally, the map depicts 3 scenarios for a permanent visitor services area. Option 1 would be to establish a new visitor services area closer to State Route 4 near the site of an existing movie set cabin. This location would provide the ability to interpret the landscape, history, and wildlife at the start of the people's journeys. Particularly if the road is realigned behind this location, the site offers spectacular views of Valle Grande and would serve as a point of departure for nearby trails. It would also be easier to maintain and access in the winter. Option 2 would adaptively reuse existing Cabin District buildings as the visitor services area. This would entail rehabilitating the early 20th century log cabins from 3-season to 4-season use. This location would provide the ability to focus the park's interpretation on the area's human history, in particular ranching and the archaic time period. The area places visitors closer to some of the park's fundamental resources and values, such as the historic Cabin District and History Grove, as well as front country trails. Winter access is more difficult to this area, but manageable. Option 3 would establish a new visitor services area to the northwest of the Cabin District along the slope of Redondo Mountain near a burn scar from the 2013 Thompson Ridge fire. This location would focus the park's interpretation on the geology and the Caldera's resurgent dome, wildfires, and climate change. Both options number 2 and number 3 would also provide self-guided experiences along the way before reaching the primary visitor services area. Similar to option 2, this location places visitors closer to many of the park's fundamental resources and values and front country trails, but minimizes alterations to the historic setting of the Cabin District. Winter access is also more difficult compared to option 1, but again manageable. In any of these scenarios, the park entrance station would be moved closer to NM4, and there is an option to consider overnight public lodging at the Baca Lodge, an 8-room building constructed by the private landowners near History Grove. This option could be considered if alternative seasonal park housing could be identified for park employees who currently use that lodging. Next slide. We will now look at two resource assessments that are paralleling the GMP process. Next slide. This slide depicts areas that we are carrying forward for further wilderness eligibility assessment. Pursuant to the Wilderness Act, the National Park System lands are considered eligible for wilderness if they are at least 5,000 acres or of sufficient size to make practicable their preservation and use in an unimpaired condition, and if they possess the following characteristics. The earth and its community of life are untrammeled by humans, where humans are visitors and do not remain. The area is undeveloped and retains its primeval character and influence without permanent improvements or human habitation. The area generally appears to have been affected primarily by the forces of nature, with the imprint of humans' work substantially unnoticeable. The area is protected and managed so as to preserve its natural conditions, and the area offers outstanding opportunities for solitude or a primitive and unconfined type of recreation. All lands within the park are being evaluated for the eligibility for inclusion in the National Wilderness Preservation System, consistent with NPS management policies. Those lands that did not meet the criteria during an initial evaluation by the NPS are indicated on the map with horizontal crosshatching as areas initially assessed as ineligible. Based on the criteria, the NPS has identified 6 units within the park that may be considered eligible for inclusion in the National Wilderness Preservation System. These 6 units total 54,192 acres, or 61% of the park's total acreage. The final determination for wilderness eligibility within the National Park Unit rests with the NPS director. Areas that are determined eligible would then undergo a wilderness suitability assessment, and ultimately it is up to Congress whether to formally designate lands as wilderness. Next slide. This slide depicts all rivers and creeks that are within Valles Caldera. There are 9 named waterways, all shown as blue lines. The black lines on the map form watershed boundaries for each of the waterways. The thick blue line along the southern boundary of the park is the section of the East Fork Jemez River on the Santa Fe National Forest that is designated as Wild and Scenic River already. To be eligible for Wild and Scenic River designation, a river must be free-flowing and possess one or more outstandingly remarkable values. Outstandingly remarkable values are river-dependent, natural, cultural, or recreational resources that are unique, rare, or exemplary at a regional or national scale. The eligibility analysis consists of an examination of the river's hydrology, including any man-made alterations, and an inventory of its natural, cultural, and recreational resources. All rivers and creeks within the park are being evaluated for Wild and Scenic River eligibility. The preliminary eligibility assessment is still underway, so we have not yet reached any initial conclusions. We nonetheless wanted to share where we are in the process so as to invite feedback on this assessment as well. This concludes the description of the preliminary concepts that we have developed so far. So at this time, I will pass it back to Sarah. Next slide.
All right, thank you, Jorge, for describing these preliminary ideas. Now we are at the most important part of the meeting, which is your role in helping with this planning effort. I'll share how to learn more about the project, how to submit comments, and finally we'll transition to our question and answer portion to answer any clarifying questions you may have. Next slide. In addition to attending tonight's meeting, opportunities to learn more include reviewing the online story map. A link to the story map will be shared with you now. We also invite you to attend an in-person meeting next week. We'll copy these dates and locations into the Q&A panel now as well, and you can see them on the screen. Finally, if you'd like to rewatch this meeting or share it with a friend, we will be posting the recording on the project website, probably late next week. And we'll announce that via email and social media. And all of this information, including the links to the story map and the recording, may be found on the project website. And a link to that will be shared in the Q&A panel now. Next slide. All right, when you are ready to make comments on the project website, we are particularly interested in your thoughts on 4 questions. You'll see these questions on the project website as you provide feedback, and I'll read them now. The first question is, how do the various concepts the park is considering help your ability to access different locations or improve your overall experience? How might they hinder your access or experience? The second question is, how do you feel the management ideas and development concepts being considered provide activities and experiences you would enjoy? What activity or experience is missing and why should it be considered? Next slide, please. The third question is, what specific steps could the National Park Service take to improve your experience or protect resources at any of the following locations? The Cabin District, Banco Bonito, Sulphur Springs, the Valle Grande District, Valle San Antonio, Valle Toledo, Valle Jaramillo, or Redondo Meadows. And the last question is, what do you like or dislike about the preliminary management ideas and development concepts the park is considering? Do any aspects of these initial ideas raise specific resource concerns? Next slide. We want to hear your thoughts on the preliminary ideas shared by Jorge. Today, we will use this time for your questions and for any clarifying questions you have. We are not taking official comments at this meeting, so please visit the project website and provide your comments directly at that website. Doing it that way will really help us analyze and respond to your comments much more efficiently. And we urge you to use the project website to submit comments, but if needed, you may also mail a hard copy comments to the address listed here. Let's go to the next slide. So this slide shows the project home screen. To submit comments, look on the left-hand side of the page. You'll find a link called Open for Comment, which is shown here circled in red. And when you click on that, you'll be able to get to the materials and submit your comments. Next slide. At this point, we'll transition to answering any clarifying questions that you may have. And let's go to the next slide. So again, looks like some of you have already found the Q&A panel, but you should be able to click on it in the upper right-hand corner. It looks like a dialog bubble. And you can turn the Q&A panel on or off by clicking on that. Next slide. And so when you're on that question and answer tab, you'll see a purple bottom at the bottom right corner of the screen, which is indicated here with the arrow. And if you click on that purple button, you'll be able to type in a question for us to answer. Next slide. And once you click on that button, this is where you can type the answer or question. Note that your name is not required. You can post a question anonymously. And again, this time here today is for more clarifying questions or points that aren't making sense. And we're not taking official comments at this meeting, but instead, please do that on the website. And now we'll transition to taking your questions. And I see a few have come in. Thank you very much. So I'm going to be monitoring the panel and read aloud any questions that are submitted. And please make sure to include details in your questions so that we can better understand them. And then Jorge will primarily be responding to questions and may call on others from the National Park Service team. I'll ask any additional NPS staff to introduce themselves as they come on for responding to questions. And at this point, we're going to take a really quick break, like a 1 to 2 minute break, just to organize some of the questions and start to answer them. All right. Okay, thank you very much for typing in those questions, and we'll get started now. The first question that I wanted to respond to is, to clarify, is the deadline for comments June 8th, as shown in the slides, or June 9th, as shown on the website? And the answer is June 9th, and I apologize for the not matching dates, but June 9th is shown on the website. Thank you for your question. All right, I'm going to go to another question, and this one is about here. All right. This question is, are there any plans to directly involve the communities impacted by these new proposed entrance locations? The Sulphur Springs community, for example. So, Jorge, I'll pass it on to you to respond to that question.
Yeah, it's a really great question, and the answer is absolutely yes. We're very interested in seeking feedback from those communities along Forest Road 105 about entry points into the park through those areas. And, you know, to elaborate a little bit further, as we've already started noticing, visitors are driving up Forest Road 105, which is a forest road, so it is a public road, and they're driving and stopping and parking right at the Park Service gate there. And because there's not a lot of space there, there's a lot of traffic congestion, the gate gets blocked, it's hard to turn around, and ultimately what's happening is we're having visitors are causing impacts on Forest Service lands when they're trying to access Valles Caldera. So we do believe that it's important to not ignore that emerging issue with impacts in that area, but rather to proactively focus on how to provide better access parking along that route. Furthermore, with the acquisition of Sulphur Springs, it's such an important location to share and tell the story about Valles Caldera's volcanic past and contemporary history that we want to be able to showcase that and provide that as a primary interpretive location. So I think there is going to be some issues that we need to discuss and work through with that community, particularly the increased traffic in that area. Already we see people driving too fast on that road. It kicks up a lot of dirt and dust. And there creates safety problems. So I think there's probably ways we can explore solutions to that issue, but I don't think ignoring the problem and not having a dedicated access point there will solve it.
Okay, great, thank you. I'll move on to another question. This one is, if the GMP won't be done until summer 2025, does that mean that no further trail access, camping possibilities, or visitor center development until then?
Yes and no, I guess. We are continuing to receive funding from the National Park Service to make improvements to our existing trails. So that's going to continue, and I think we can enhance the quality of the hiking, biking, horseback riding experience, even in the interim while we're working on this plan. But when it comes to new infrastructure like a visitor center or new trails and other aspects like that, it is going to have to wait until we come to final decisions about these infrastructure in this GMP. So I know it seems like a long time to wait, and believe me, I sometimes get frustrated with the pace of government as well. But what I have to remind myself about is the National Park Service is in the perpetuity business, and we want to get this right. And Valles Caldera has somewhat of a unique opportunity coming into the national park system, 100 years plus after the National Park Service was established, that we can learn a lot from both the best practices and successes that other parks have achieved, but also some of the pitfalls and mistakes that other parks have done. I've shared with others one of the examples that comes to my mind, having lived in New Mexico for a long time, is Carlsbad Caverns National Park. The National Park Service back in the day decided to build a parking lot right on top of the caverns itself. And what that has led to is some issues with oil and other chemicals dripping from that parking area and potentially impacting the cavern. In hindsight, I'd say the Park Service probably would have preferred to place that parking area somewhere else. So we want to be thoughtful about where we place our infrastructure, and as well as how we right size it to not only consider the visitation that we're getting right now, but also visitation that we're anticipating in the future.
Great, thank you, Jorge. Okay, I'll ask another kind of process question, and I think I can actually respond to this one. But the question is, are you collecting official comments at any of these meetings? And the answer to that is, we primarily would love everyone to submit comments on the website through the project website. However, we will also be collecting any handwritten or mailed in comments. So if you do attend one of the in-person meetings and you write out your comments and give it to us, we will accept those then. What we won't be doing is, if we're just discussing, we won't be trying to write down your thoughts from those discussions, because we really want it to be in your own words. Thanks for that question. Okay, I'm going to move on to another question for Jorge, and this question is about paving the road. The question is, are there any options that do not include paving the main road?
It's certainly up for consideration, and I think we can explore that through this GMP process. The challenge with not paving the road is what I described in my presentation. There are maintenance challenges with a gravel road. It limits and really inhibits access in the wintertime, but also it creates dust that can impact plant communities along the sides of those roads. It can create erosion and sedimentation runoff into rivers along those roads. And it creates some challenges with meeting some of our accessibility goals when we have unpaved roads and unpaved parking lots. So it is going to be a balance, but I think where there are areas where we anticipate higher visitor use and visitor density, paving roads may make more sense, similar to other typical National Park Service units. But in the backcountry, I think we're all generally pursuing an approach where that area remains more primitive in nature with existing gravel roads, where they might be improved and widened, but they would remain as gravel.
Great, thank you. All right, I'm going to stick on the topic of roads, and this question is NPS considering closing the back roads or trails to driving by hunters? These are currently closed to driving by the public, but still receive impacts from one group of users.
I might need a little more clarification to that. There are no roads that are open to hunters that aren't open to other user groups like the public or under a special use permit. So we've tried to do our best to maintain consistency with road use, but the one road that is available to under a special use permit that's not open to the general public right now is that road along Sulphur Canyon. And that's primarily due to its condition. It's not suitable for sedans and non-high clearance vehicles. And with our backcountry vehicle route, we don't have any restrictions or limitations on the types of vehicles that can use the public vehicle route. So if we can improve that Sulphur Canyon Road to make it accessible to non-high clearance, non-four-wheel drive vehicles, as we described in the presentation, one option is to expand the backcountry vehicle route to include that Sulphur Canyon Road as well.
Okay, and it looks like there was a little bit of clarification pointed out here, specifically the Banco Bonito roads being open to hunters and not the public.
I can help clarify that there are no roads within Banco Bonito that are open to hunters and not the public.
Great, thank you. All right, let's transition over to a little bit about trails. And this question is, what criteria was used to determine which trails should be open to hikers, equestrians, or bikers?
That's a great question. I think the first one for just hikers are trails that are not on existing or legacy logging roads or ranch roads. Those are trails that are more of a single track developed trails that we want to maintain, or more narrow trails that are better suited for pedestrian use only. The roads or the trails that have been identified for hiking and equestrian use, if you overlay some of these maps together, some of the areas that we've identified as potentially eligible for wilderness designation those are the trails in those areas where those would be open to horseback riding and pedestrian use, because mountain bikes are not allowed in wilderness areas. And then where we have trails that are on legacy logging roads and we feel that don't create user conflicts when we have multiple use trails, that's why the vast majority of those trails are open to all 3 user groups.
Great, thank you. Okay, it looks like we got a couple questions about backcountry camping. One person said, is there a possibility for backcountry leave no trace camping prior to the GMP? And then another person said, okay, it's not included in the scope of this planning effort. Does it mean it won't be allowed, or is there a different planning process to decide if and where backcountry camping would be allowed?
It's good questions. I want to clarify backcountry camping is not necessarily outside the scope of the GMP. We just haven't gotten there yet in our planning. There's a few other aspects to this GMP planning and workshops, internal workshops that we need to conduct about visitor use management and things like that. But it is an interesting issue. I'm really motivated to try to promote backcountry camping and backpacking opportunities and overnight opportunities, where we're trying to figure out how we assess the effects is if we allow dispersed camping anywhere without any sort of zones where overnight camping is allowed in the backcountry. We need to assess how natural and cultural resources and values would be impacted. Alternatively, we could identify certain locations where backcountry camping is authorized in certain areas, and we can better monitor and assess those impacts. But we just haven't gotten there in the planning process yet to move forward with that. But I'm just as eager as you are to get there.
Great, thank you. Okay, we have a couple of questions about the recent ruling on Banco Bonito. And kind of the question is, how might that ruling impact GMP ideas in that area?
It's a good question. Due to the pending litigation, the National Park Service isn't able to comment on the pending litigation in any specific ways. I can say right in more general terms, the National Park Service enabling legislation for Valles Caldera National Preserve covers the entirety of the 88,900 acre congressionally legislated landscape. And so we do have a responsibility in this general management plan to evaluate and assess our management approaches across the entire landscape. And through this process, we are seeking tribal consultation with all of our 38 associated tribes, and we hope to take advantage of any feedback we get from our tribes to understand concerns and interests and modify our planning just like we would with any feedback we get from the general public.
All right, thank you. Okay, now I have a mountain biking question. Are any of the trails proposed for mountain bike use located within the 6 units being evaluated for wilderness designation?
No. I think if I recall correctly, it was around 75 miles of trails that would be open to mountain bike use, and all of those are outside of those 6 potentially eligible wilderness units.
Great. All right. Then this question is about horse trailer parking. What accommodations are going to be provided for horse trailer parking?
That's also a great question. We're not at that level of detail yet in the planning process, but as we're looking at how we design trailheads, we will be looking at accommodating vehicles of all shapes and sizes. So everything from a smart car sedan to a motor coach and a truck towing a trailer. So we need to make sure that any of our trailheads have the ability for those types of vehicles to park as well as turn around.
All right, thank you. All right. The next couple questions are about wilderness areas and wild and scenic rivers. And I think Dan Naosi actually may have volunteered to answer this first one. So the question is, what is the utility to designating wilderness areas and wild and scenic rivers? Does it change the way these areas are currently managed within the park? If not, does the designation provide more funding?
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. I guess just one clarification. The National Park Service is evaluating eligibility of these areas for wilderness, future wilderness designation that would be taken up by Congress at some point in time, potentially. So we don't actually designate the areas, we just assess their eligibility and then move through further study processes to inform a recommendation to Congress, which is probably quite some time off. Similarly, with wild and scenic rivers, we are doing an eligibility assessment and don't have the ability to designate those ourselves. So in terms of why we're considering those things, certainly as you think about development and motorized or mechanized use within Valles Caldera into the future, knowing sort of what potentially eligible wilderness areas might exist helps inform that, because per our management policies, when we do determine something is eligible, it then becomes managed as wilderness as if it is designated. So similarly, with both wilderness and wild and scenic rivers, that eligibility assessment kind of just adds a layer of protection to preserve the qualities of those areas and those rivers, to protect them into the future, so that future designation does not become precluded. So there is an additional requirement on the part of the Park Service, again, to sort of manage eligible wilderness areas as if they are designated, and to commit to preserving things like water quality and free-flowing character of those streams that are determined eligible as well for wild and scenic river designation.
Thank
Unfortunately,
you, Dan. Oh, do you have more?
I thought there might have been a second part to that question, Sarah. I don't know if you were gonna
Yes.
that one up too.
Yes, absolutely. I was just going to say that.
Okay.
So the second question is, will the wilderness evaluation and wild and scenic evaluation be incorporated into the general management plan at a future stage of this process?
Yeah, those are typically, I think, fairly internal processes. There are public sort of notification requirements, but again, sort of as mentioned, they're kind of separate but parallel processes that are informing the general management plan. So they will not necessarily, final decisions about those things will not be made through the general management planning process, but to the extent that they inform the process, yes, the results are being, the analysis is being considered, and the results would be considered as we move through the planning and decision-making process for the GMP.
Great, thank you, Dan. All right, now I'm going to move to some questions about what's permitted and permitted access. So the first question is, are there plans for permitting hiking on Redondo Peak?
Excellent question. Right now, with the proposed trail network that we listed previously, there are no current plans for a designated trail to Redondo Peak. Currently, the National Park Service at Valles Caldera National Preserve promotes a voluntary closure of Redondo Peak, given the sensitivity of its cultural and natural resources at the summit. There's also a requirement in the superintendent's compendium if a individual nonetheless wishes to summit the peak, that a special use permit is required. So we can work with you on that special use permit process. But again, we encourage individuals not to access the area out of respect and sensitivity to those cultural resources and values. Furthermore, establishing a trail up there is going to be quite challenging. The 2013 Thompson Ridge fire created some pretty significant impacts in the area, and the entire high country within Redondo Peak area is littered with tens of thousands of dead and down trees that were burned during that fire. So it's quite challenging area to access because of those conditions after the fire.
Great. All right. Let's move on. So there's a couple questions about accessing the backcountry roads, and well, I'll kind of combine two. The first one is, will there be restrictions or permitting for accessing the backcountry auto roads? And then the second part of that is, what is the basis for only allowing 35 vehicles per day past the cabin district? And will that end?
Sure. Through this general management plan, we will be exploring visitor use within the backcountry along that backcountry vehicle road. There's two primary considerations there. One is the current condition of the road as a one-lane road with a gravel road with pullouts, and because of the narrowness of that road, there are some safety considerations that we need to consider about its carrying capacity at any given time. Secondarily, we're also going to be exploring what that carrying capacity should be based on management zoning and desired future desired conditions for our management zoning. If you recall, that backcountry route is in the self-guided zone and then extends to areas that are in the self-reliance, backcountry self-reliance zone. And so some of those future desired conditions are to maintain more of a low to moderate density of visitation in those areas and intentionally concentrate visitation more in these front country visitor engagement zones in order to prioritize other park values like ecosystem services, wildlife habitat, quiet and solitude. And it's going to be a balance where I've heard over many, many years, there's a little bit of a push and pull of wanting more access to Valles Caldera while also not loving it to death and not treating it like a Disneyland. And I think that's where our zoning desired conditions will come into play, and our decisions about carrying capacity for visitor use management to make sure that we try to accommodate that right balance of human visitation with protection and preservation of some of these other fundamental resources and values. But there's nothing at this point that is locking in the number of 35 vehicles. That's a legacy from the predecessor management agency, and we will be evaluating that carrying capacity through this general management planning process.
All right, thank you. Okay, so another question about access, and this is, is there a possibility to change the hours of access? And some folks noted that they'd be interested in sunrise or sunset, the opportunity to photograph at those dusk and dawn times, as well as just the largeness of the park and the ability to get to do what you want to do within that time frame of the park being open and accessible.
Yeah, all good questions. So to clarify, the park is open for pedestrian access from sunrise to sunset. And then in the summertime, the park is open to vehicles from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. If you have an interest in visiting the park after hours, at night, in other time periods, there is a way to seek a special use permit to gain access. We've done that for other photographers and other things in the past. But as a future goal, we hope to not only allow extended hours through a backcountry overnight permit and backpacking and overnight camping, that will provide more access beyond those sunrise to sunset hours that we currently have. Furthermore, as we are able to develop some additional infrastructure to better secure certain areas of the park, that will allow us to be able to open up certain areas, potentially even for 24-hour access, even in the coming years.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to transition to a couple of questions more about the process. And so the first question is, and I can answer this one, will there be any additional time added to the comment period, given that Pepsi was down for a couple days last weekend? And I'll just say that it's unlikely that we'll extend the comment period due to disruptions in the Pepsi system. There will be additional opportunities to comment on the plan at later stages in the process and during the NEPA analysis. If the Pepsi system were to go down during those, like the last day of comments, we would most likely extend it for people who didn't get to it until the very end. The second question, which I can also respond to, is just saying that for individuals with accessibility concerns, the ArcGIS story map is not very user-friendly. Is there a full PDF document that could be posted online? And unfortunately, we do not have something that could be posted online. However, if the person that wrote that would be willing to share their email address, I'd love to contact you and see if there's something we could do to be more accessible. We were under the impression that the story map had made some significant accessibility improvements and was readable through screen readers. In addition, at our public meetings, we will have American Sign Language interpreters available. So we're trying to do make some accessibility improvements, but we would love to hear from you on more specifics. And then the third question I will ask Jorge to respond to, and this is just about how the public meeting locations were chosen, and specifically wanting Los Alamos or wondering why Los Alamos wasn't selected as one of the in-person meeting locations.
Yeah, happy to respond to that. We were very intentional about where we selected our meeting locations for these open house meetings, and what was one of our guiding principles was to try to establish these host these meetings in locations that are more accessible to underserved communities with higher diverse populations, Hispanic communities, tribal reservations and tribal communities. And so Espanola, for example, is much more equidistant to a number of tribal communities, a higher population of Hispanic communities, and but nonetheless still accessible by residents of Los Alamos as well as Santa Fe. Similarly for Albuquerque, we chose Bernalillo because it's a little bit closer to some of the tribal communities that we partner with, like Santa Ana Pueblo, San Felipe Pueblo, as well as Hispanic communities in Bernalillo. And we were hoping to host one in San Isidro to be able to get a little bit closer to communities in Cuba and further northwest on US 550, but we weren't able to find a location that was large enough in size. So Walatoa Visitor Center was not as far up the Jemez Valley as Jemez Springs, so we were hoping that we could still attract members of the public and folks from tribal communities like Zia Pueblo, Jemez Pueblo, and communities like Cuba.
Great. Thanks, Jorge. All right, we have another wilderness question. And this one is, given that 95% of old growth trees were logged and there are over 1,000 miles of logging or ranch roads in the preserve, how can this pass the untrammeled by man requirement for wilderness suitability?
It's a great question, and it's something that we talked about a lot internally as well. I'll definitely open up to other people on this call from the Park Service to help answer this, but this question has essentially been asked and answered by the United States Congress, particularly when they passed the Eastern Wilderness Act that established wilderness areas on the East Coast and national forests that had been previously logged and have logging impacts as well. And the congressional intent behind that Eastern Wilderness Act essentially stated that areas that had been previously logged do not necessarily eliminate them from consideration as wilderness. And so as we were looking at previous logging disturbances at Valles Caldera, we were primarily looking at logging road density, where logging roads were substantially noticeable versus areas where they're less noticeable on the landscape. And that was probably one of the primary criteria that deemed a number of areas within the park as ineligible for wilderness, and areas were carved out because of those higher densities of logging roads. But areas where there were lower densities, we did not rule them out just because of previous disturbances like that. Dan, Mike, if you'd like to add anything else to that, feel free.
Nothing on this end, Michael. I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add.
Okay. Okay, well, I'll keep moving. Okay, the next question is about campgrounds. And this person is asking about, the plans for the campsites or campgrounds and how the areas will be protected from overuse. And specifically the one near South Mountain.
It's a good question. I think at this point in the planning process, we have not drilled down to any sort of specific design or capacity of these types of primitive campsites, but we're still at a more conceptual stage in the planning process, identifying potential locations where that could be suitable. And then kind of the general concept of a primitive campground where the vehicles are parked in parking areas directly adjacent to the road. And then there's walk-up campsites where there's an area for a tent, a picnic table, without any other sort of services like water or electricity. And I think through further planning, we'll be able to look at more suitability questions of design and how to manage for that. But I think we can also explore monitoring programs to make sure that resources are not being impacted by those types of uses.
Okay, thank you. All right, this question is pretty specific. It says, when will the gate at the highway be removed? It's dangerous.
Hasn't really come up in the scope of this general management plan just yet. Ultimately, I think it'll be a function of the overall infrastructure development as we design ways to secure the interior of the park unit to protect those cultural and natural resources during outside hours. And but we can certainly continue to look at those considerations.
Great. All right. Okay, this next question is about permits. And it's really, why are permits being considered? And speaking specifically to trails like Cerro La Garita, and not wanting an overnight permit, but would like to, drive in early without the hassle of a permit.
I think it's a good question. I think it's ultimately right now we don't have the infrastructure in place to accommodate that type of use, and we need to do additional planning and environmental and historic preservation compliance to make sure that any of those types of activities are addressed and how we are handling any impacts from those types of uses. As I said previously, it's certainly in all of our interests at the park to pursue an overnight opportunities, but most parks that I know have some type of overnight backcountry permit that's required. Bandelier National Monument, for example, has overnight backcountry permit that is required if you're going to be there after sunset, and we would be most likely pursuing a similar program and system like that.
All right, great. All right, I just want to let everyone know we have about 10 minutes left in this meeting, and we are working hard to try to get to everyone's comments or questions. However, if you didn't get your question answered, please, write in the project website, and we'll be monitoring that. Okay, so a few more questions that we have here, and this one is about the Sulphur Canyon Road extension. So the question is, would this proposed road extension create a backcountry driving loop through the heart of the preserve? And just a concern that multiple entrance points would likely have negative impacts on the wild quality of the backcountry.
I'll try to break that up into segments. Number one, the connecting the Sulphur Canyon Road into the backcountry vehicle route would create a option for ingress and egress from two different locations. But I think what we are trying to accomplish with our management zoning, as I said previously, is to try to identify the appropriate carrying capacity for that backcountry vehicle route that looks at maintaining those fundamental resources and values and future desired conditions that we want for the backcountry. So while we want to maintain an opportunity for people to go back there, it's quite popular with visitors for whether it's scenic driving, fishing, and being able to access some of the backcountry trails. So it's not something that we're intending to eliminate entirely. However, the level of use and carrying capacity is something that we're going to try to explore in this general management planning process, so we can maintain those future desired conditions in the self-guided and backcountry self-reliant zones.
Okay, great. Okay, we've gotten a couple of questions on something that I think is beyond the scope of the plan, but this is really about whether the GMP is addressing cattle grazing at all.
That's outside the scope of the GMP.
Okay. Great. Okay, we have another question, and this one is about how the front country infrastructure project relates to the general management plan.
Good question. Given some of these time horizons that we're looking at for the general management plan, to remind, we're looking at sometime in 2025 to complete the plan. And then if that wasn't hard enough work the next level of hard work begins of trying to pursue funding for some of this infrastructure development that we've and goals to implement the goals that we've identified in the GMP. And that could take some time. And because of that, the Park Service conducted a preliminary analysis of readiness for this general management plan. And what that planning report recommended was, in concert with pursuing the general management plan, that we continue to pursue some of the some interim steps to address some of our baseline infrastructure needs to improve and enhance visitor experience and quality. And so that's where the National Park Service is pursuing some of these front country infrastructure components to try to address existing visitor use management at its current state. Now, many of the proposals that we have in that infrastructure plan are temporary in nature, and we've identified specifically in that document that we're doing that because we are waiting for the general management plan to help inform whether we continue with those types of infrastructure improvements, or if we start moving in a different direction based on the outcomes of the GMP. But many of the things that we're looking at are basic modifications that are likely to be needed regardless of outcomes of the general management plan.
All right. I'm looking to see if we missed any last questions. We did get a thank you from someone that said they love the Valles Caldera and enjoy it often. We also got a question about if it's possible to share the maps of each option separately shown. And at this time, we do not have that available, but if you would like to share your email address with us, we can communicate about, trying to clarify that for you. Okay. Well, at this point in time, I just want to thank everyone for participating and for asking all these great questions. I hope we'll see some of you in person next week. And we look forward to seeing the comments and really trying to understand, questions, concerns, or other ideas that you have as we continue with this process. And I'd also add again that this is not the last time that you'll have a chance to be part of a public process on this planning effort. There is another one planned later down the road. So with that, I guess I'll pass it on to Jorge if you'd like to make any closing remarks.
Sure. I really appreciate and express my gratitude to everyone who attended tonight. I encourage you to take advantage of some of the resources that are available on the park planning website, as well as to attend one of the open house meetings that are coming up next week. And if there's any other questions that we can answer, we can try to do that for you there. And thank you again for your interest and support of Valles Caldera and our hopes to improve it as we go forward.
All right. Well, with that, I wish everyone a pleasant evening, and thank you again for your participation.